Episode 24, Chapter 22. Chapter 22.
Open your eyes, Link. Wake up.
Princess Zelda's voice still ringing out in his head, Link swept his cloak off of his body, kicking his legs out to the side, catching the ankles of his would-be assassin. The masked figure stumbled over his feet but didn't fall. It still gave Link enough time to roll to the side, throwing himself to his feet. He leaped backwards, stumbling slightly over the uneven ground, as the attacker's wickedly curved blade hissed through the air, seeking Link's chest. Link had no time to think, to try to wonder at who the assassin's identity was or if Delilah was safe. As the assassin whirled, wielding a curved sickle in either hand, Link spun out of the way and ducked, trying to sweep a leg out again. The assassin was prepared for it this time and jumped over Link's outstretched leg, spinning the sickle around in their hand, and plunging the pointed edge down towards Link's exposed scalp. Link rolled, avoiding the worst of the attack, though he felt a sudden, searing pain down his bare back as the blade sliced his flesh open there. He jumped to his feet and placed the tree he had been sleeping near between him and the assassin. He heard the attacker's sickle strike the wood, and Link spun around the tree, slamming a fist into the side of the attacker's head, sending him sprawling onto Link's cloak. Satisfied, Link reached down to where he had left his sword lying against the tree trunk, only to find his hand closing on empty air. His sword was gone. Link looked up as the assassin spun and rose in a blur of movement. So fast. Faster than Link, for sure. This time, however, the assassin didn't immediately attack, instead reaching up and straightening his mask, which had been knocked askew by Link's punch. The assassin looked up at Link and tilted their head curiously, looking at him.
Looking for your sword?
The assassin spoke with a female voice.
You aren't going to find it. I threw it in the lake.
He knew that voice. Eyes widening, Link looked to the side, where Delilah's bedroll lay empty. The clothes and boots that she had been wearing earlier sat next to it in a crumpled heap. Link's eyes found the assassin again, taking in her appearance. Thin and muscular, yet bearing an indisputably female figure. Now that he had a moment to pay attention, she was the right height and build. She wore a tight-fitting black and red bodysuit that covered her from head to toe. He could see no sign of her auburn hair, and the mask covered her face. With the voice, there was little doubt in his mind that the assassin standing before him was Delilah.
Delilah,
Link said, eyes darting around for another weapon. His ancient sword was in Spirit's saddlebags, which could work, if it weren't for the fact that they were on the other side of the fire. And Delilah.
What are you doing? Well, I thought that would be obvious,
she said, rolling her head on her shoulders.
I plan to skin you like a rabbit.
She leaped forward, spinning her sickles in either hand with deft fingers before bringing them together in a move that would have decapitated Link, if he hadn't stepped back. She kicked out, and her foot caught him in the midsection, knocking the breath from his lungs and making him double over. Her knee slammed into his face. Stars burst in front of Link's eyes, and he cried out, stumbling back. He tasted blood. When his vision cleared, she was there, moving as fast as a viper. He caught her first arm with his palm, but before he could disarm her, the other sickle swept in towards his exposed gut. He shoved her back, disrupting the slash enough that it passed within a hair's breadth of his bare stomach. Delilah spun, twisting her sickle around into a backhand grip, sweeping it in a wide arc towards his head. Link ducked it, leaning towards her and striking her twice in quick succession with his fists. She grunted in surprise, leaping back, one fist pressed to her midsection where his punches had landed.
I'm glad you woke up,
she said. He heard a new edge to her voice that had never been there when they spoke during the day.
I had heard from some of our spies that you were an adept fighter, and, of course, I have heard the legends. Who are you? Are you Sheikah?
Link asked, standing up straight and reaching up to wipe blood from his nose and mouth. Her laugh that followed sounded almost crazed. It sent a chill down his back.
You truly don't know? Oh, how delicious.
Delilah moved, her body twisting like that of a dancer. Every move she made seemed to flow perfectly into the next with blinding speed. Her sickles were flashes of dark metal in the night, difficult to make out in the dim light. Only her white mask truly stood out. Link dodged the flurry of blows, diving into a roll that took him just past her spinning form. He came back to his feet and sprinted towards the saddlebags, leaping over the smoldering remains of his fire and landing near where Spirit stood, looking anxious. Something flashed past his ear. A small metal disc lodged itself in the leather of the nearest saddlebag, and Link looked back just in time to see her grab another of the throwing weapons off her waist and whip it towards him. Link dodged, but Spirit was not so lucky. The horse behind Link screamed in sudden pain and terror, kicking his legs and breaking into a gallop, running away from Link and Delilah. Link felt a flash of fury. If she had heard his horse. She sent several more of the spinning discs Link's way, and he was forced to leap to the side, landing in a roll and coming back up a few feet away from where he had been standing. Delilah was on him almost immediately, wielding both sickles again with deadly accuracy. She struck with quick cuts, aiming not to catch his vital organs, but to give him multiple shallow gashes on his forearms, biceps, and chest. Pain flared wherever the metal blades touched, but Link had little opportunity to break away and run back to the saddlebags. Every time he tried, she would follow his movements as if she could read his mind. Finally, Link leaped into a backflip, landing a kick to her face in the process. Her head snapped back, and she fell onto her back. Delilah did not remain lying down for more than a split second, kicking herself back up to a standing position. He could tell from the set of her shoulders that he had angered her this time. She came at him again, and Link was forced to give up ground, his feet soon leaving the grass of their small encampment behind and setting down on the red dirt road. He slapped aside one of the sickles but felt the second one slice into his side. He hissed in pain and spun away from her. I need a weapon, damn it. If he kept trying to fight her unarmed, he would die. He already lost too much blood as it was. He would begin to slow soon. Adrenaline could only carry him on for so long. He rolled to the side, avoiding another flurry of blows, and came up on one knee next to a thick tree branch that had fallen off the tree he slept under. That will work, he thought as he snatched it up, catching Delilah's next attack. The sickle cut deep into the wood, but the branch held. The second sickle came in for the kill, its point aiming for his neck. He threw his other arm out, catching the backside of the blade with his hand and driving it forward, towards her own torso. She twisted her wrist just in time, and the flat of the blade struck her chest, rather than the point. Delilah disengaged, stepping back and looking him up and down. He thought that she was smiling behind her mask. Link stood to his feet, suppressing a groan. His side flared with terrible pain, but the pain in his arms had faded some. In fact, he could not much feel his arms at all. That wasn't good.
Such a valiant hero you are, Link,
she said, her tone delighted.
Fighting me with nary but a stick.
Link gripped the stick with both hands, taking a deep breath and trying to dispel the pain of his many wounds. He felt blood running down his sides and back, soaking into the trousers that he had worn to bed. When he did not engage in her banter, she made an irritated sound and leaped forward again. With the stick in hand, Link was not quite at such a severe disadvantage, able to keep her at a safer range. The sickles had a very short range, and the stick was slightly longer than Link's silver sword. He was slowing, though, and they both knew it. Every time one of her sickles struck the stick, he was afraid that it would be the blow that knocked it from his increasingly unfeeling hands. And though he was able to keep her from striking him, he had no way of going on the offensive. He caught one of her sickles with the stick again, but this time, she did not lunge out at him with her other sickle. Instead, she swept the other sickle across the upper portion of the stick like a pair of pincers. Link's heart sank and he knew what would happen, even before the second sickle connected with the piece of wood, snapping it in two. The longer of the two pieces spun away into the darkness, leaving Link with a jagged piece of wood that was shorter, even, than the length of Delilah's sickles. She laughed in a manic sort of way, thinking that she had finally won, and brought her sickle around to cut Link's throat. Link jumped, catching the blade in his shoulder instead, and drove the jagged stick into Delilah's chest. Delilah screamed in pain, leaping back and grabbing at the piece of wood that jutted from her body. Link smiled faintly, reaching up and covering the new cut on his shoulder with his hand. The sickle had cut deep into the muscle, leaving that arm feeling weak and difficult to move. He couldn't really feel the pain, though. The assassin wrenched the jagged piece of wood from her chest and threw it to the ground in disgust. Link's aim had, unfortunately, been off, plunging into her chest just to the right of her heart. Ah well. It had been worth a shot.
I will enjoy presenting your head to Master Koga,
Delilah spat, her tone ragged.
Sounds like your master has some strange tastes,
Link said, taking a labored breath. He glanced to the saddlebags, but they were just too far. He had one other tool at his disposal, though. One other chance. He just hoped he could reach it. Delilah spun her sickles in her hands once more before running towards Link. He waited until she was barely upon him, her curved blades seeking his flesh, before he spun into a crouch, kicking his outstretched leg out. It connected solidly with her side, and it, along with her own momentum, sent her sprawling to the ground past him. Link jumped to his feet, sprinting for the spot he had been sleeping. If she had disposed of it, too, then he was doomed. But if she hadn't seen it or known what it was, yes. He rolled, hearing a pair of the spinning blades hiss through the air just over him, and came up holding the Sheikah slate, his back to their campsite. He spun, fingers dancing across the surface of the smooth rectangle device. Delilah had already caught up with him and leaped in the air, both sickles held to plunge into either side of Link's chest. He pressed the spot on the screen where he knew the icon to be located. Delilah froze in midair, suddenly glowing with a brilliant yellow light. She was mere feet from him, suspended in a field of stasis. Link leaped to his feet and punched her in the torso once, twice, 3 times. The yellow light began to pulse rapidly as the stasis field neared its breaking point. He continued to hammer blows into her frozen body, though his punches were growing weaker. He was losing too much strength now. Suddenly, she flashed with a brilliant yellow light, and Link heard an agonizing crunch. He thought it might have been her ribs. Delilah flew backwards in a low arc, hitting the ground, and tumbling end over end, before coming to rest some 10 feet away. For a moment, she was prone, and Link thought that she had been knocked unconscious or worse. But then she began to stir and pushed herself to her feet, groaning. Shaking her head, Delilah looked back around at Link, and he read fury in her posture. She pushed herself to her feet, still holding both of her sickles, and sprinted towards him again, screaming. He couldn't use stasis again so quickly, so Link's fingers danced across the screen again, selecting another icon. A glowing blue ball appeared on the ground between them, and Link pressed the button again almost just as quickly. The remote bomb exploded, and Link flew back, hitting the ground and sliding across the grass and into the still warm remains of his fire. The Sheikah slate flew from his hand, spinning away into the darkness. He rolled over lest he add burns from burning coals to his growing list of injuries and came to rest on his back beside the fire pit. To his horror, Delilah was suddenly there. She had lost her mask and one of her sickles, and he could see that her outfit looked scorched and torn in multiple places. She sat down on his legs, straddling him so that he could neither trip her to move away again. His hands searched out in the darkness, hoping to find a stick left over from the fire, anything he could use as a weapon. His fingers brushed something smooth. Something forgotten. Delilah raised her hand, readying to end his life. Link pushed himself up from the ground and drove the short knife he had used to eat his food before directly into her heart. She grunted. Delilah's sickle clattered to the ground beside them. Her eyes widened with shock. Link met them, gritting his teeth, and drove the knife in deeper. She opened her mouth, but the only sound that escaped her lips was a bloody gurgle. Link gently pushed her off of him, and she slumped to the side. With difficulty, Link sat up and rolled her over onto her back. He met her eyes again and saw, to his shame, tears at their corners. He wished that she had never lost her mask. It would have been far easier if she were the faceless assassin, rather than the woman he had spent much of his time with the day before. Delilah spasmed, and Link held her shoulder to keep her still, never looking away from her face. Soon the life leaked away from her eyes, her face grew slack, and her body stopped moving. Convinced that she would rise no longer, Link slowly pushed himself to his feet, only for his legs to collapse under his weight. Too much blood, he thought as he struggled to rise again. I've lost too much blood. He couldn't stand, but he was able to slowly crawl over to the tree that he had slept beside. Once there, he turned and sat against the rough bark. It probably should have hurt the wounds on his back, but he could no longer feel them. He needed to bind his wounds. Prevent himself from losing any more blood. He needed. Link's eyes closed, and his head slumped to the side as darkness overtook him. The sound of hooves on dirt eventually woke Link. He blinked bleary eyes and lifted his head slowly, looking around. The sun had come up while he slept, and he saw Spirit walking slowly down the dirt road. "Hey, boy," Link said, his voice a croak. The horse looked up at him and snorted softly, turning and walking towards him. Link groaned softly and pushed himself off of the tree, his body aching and feeling sore all over. It didn't seem to hurt nearly as much as it should, though, and he frowned, looking down at himself. He was covered with dry blood. A shocking amount of blood. It was on his chest, his arms, and soaked into his trousers. However, as he prodded at his body, where he knew he had taken wounds, he found nothing beyond tender flesh. His wounds had healed.
"Thanks, Mitha,"
he said softly as he rolled onto his knees. He pushed himself to his feet, taking a deep breath and exhaling slowly. Though his body was still sore, he found that he had regained much of his strength. Spirit approached Link, and he turned, hugging the horse's face fondly.
I'm sorry about that.
Spirit only nickered in response. Link ran his fingers along his horse's neck, petting him gently. Finally, he pulled away and began to inspect Spirit's body until he found where the small blade had struck. Thankfully, it had not gotten lodged into Spirit's flank or had otherwise come free when Spirit began to run. The cut didn't seem so bad, the blood around it had dried. Just to be sure, Link made a full circle around Spirit, checking for any other wounds, as well as checking his hooves for any damage. Only when he finished did he pull an apple from one of the saddlebags and hold it out for Spirit to take, which the horse happily did. Finally, Link turned and looked at the body of his would-be assassin. Delilah lay where he had left her the night before. The knife still protruded from her chest. The dirt and grass around her body had been stained red with blood. He stood there and looked down into her lifeless face for a long time. She looked tiny in death. No longer lithe and muscular, but wiry and defenseless. Link felt sick. Disgusted. Bokoblins and Lionels were one thing, but this? He felt as if he had killed for the first time all over again. Link had killed this woman. Link wasn't a fool. He knew that she had every intention on killing him. Her attack was not due to chance or some offense taken to the extreme. No, this had been an assassination attempt on his life. She had been waiting there for him to arrive. Someone wanted Link dead. The thought should scare him somehow. He had barely survived the fight during the night. In fact, were it not for Mipha's latent powers that Link now possessed, he still might have perished. Yet all he could think about was the smile Delilah gave him before laying down to sleep. Should he have known then? Was there something in her smile that should have tipped him off? Slowly, Link knelt on the ground beside Delilah and gently closed her unseeing eyes. He did not know how he should dispose of her body. How did Hylians honor their dead? Were the prayers that needed to be spoken? He couldn't remember. Link wrenched the blade from her chest and turned, throwing as hard as he could into the valley to the west. He watched as the blade spun rapidly through the air until it sank out of view. His shoulders slumped, and he lowered his head, eyes closed. After a time, he opened his eyes and looked in the direction that the castle stood, hidden from view by the mountainous terrain that surrounded the base of Death Mountain.
Princess? Princess Zelda, can you hear me?
On this day, he received no reply. Grimacing, Link sighed and picked up his Sheikah slate from where it had fallen nearby. He turned and began walking in the opposite direction. True to her word, Delilah had, indeed, thrown Link's sword into the lake. Using the Magnesis rune, Link was able to find the sword glowing crimson on the Sheikah slate's display. He carefully made his way down to the edge of the water and used the rune to lift the sword from the lake's depths. Once he completed that task, Link waded into the water himself, washing the dried blood off of him. His trousers would likely be ruined, but that was fine. He had an extra pair to wear. It took him a long time before he was satisfied that the blood was gone, both his and hers, from his body and hands. Even then, he still felt soiled when he emerged from the lake. He climbed the craggy cliff, sword slung over his shoulder and Sheikah slate attached to his hip and made his way back to the small camp. Once there, Link began to gather the largest stones that he could find. The work took several hours, and the sun had reached its high point before Link stepped back from the small pile of stones that now served as a grave for the woman, Delilah, who had tried to kill him. Link didn't know if he had ever killed a person before. Certainly, he was skilled with the blade, and had killed many monsters, both since awakening, and likely 100 years ago. Had he killed men with the same skill? Had he gone to war for his king and country? Had he protected Princess Zelda from assassins, such as Delilah? Had he ever experienced this terrible hollow feeling before? He wasn't sure he actually wanted to know the answer. It will all be worth it if I can find a way to defeat Ganon, he thought as he began to pack up his remaining supplies. He had long since replaced his blood-stained trousers with his second pair and donned the tunic that Telma had given him in Kakariko village. He was packing away the bedroll that Delilah had slept in when he noticed her small pack lying beside it. Link picked it up and opened the flap. He found little of value in it, however. Another 2 of the bananas that she had shared with him during their meal together, a few additional circular throwing blades, and a small knife with what appeared to be an ivory hilt. Link took the knife out, inspecting it, and decided to keep it as a replacement to the one he had thrown away. Unfortunately, he found no indication in her bag of who Delilah really was or why she had been sent to kill him. He had a few hints, however. First was the mask that she had been wearing. He found it while gathering stones earlier in the day. It had the Sheikah eye emblazoned on its white surface in deep crimson ink, the color of blood, but she had worn it in such a way that the eye was inverted with the teardrop above the iris. He had asked her if she was a Sheikah, but she had scoffed at the implication. So, what was she, then? Furthermore, she had mentioned a Master Koga. The name was unfamiliar to Link, but this appeared to be the man that had ordered his assassination. So, why did this Koga want him dead? Link looked back in the direction where he knew the castle lay and thought he had a pretty good idea why.
Someone is trying to stop me from freeing the divine beasts,
Link said aloud as he looked back down at the white mask.
Trying to stop me from defeating Ganon, perhaps.
But why? Why would anyone want that? Princess Zelda had told him that she didn't believe Ganon knew that Link still lived, so this seemed unlikely to have been by his order. Which meant that this was another party entirely, one that still existed today to serve Calamity Ganon, even in his absence. Link rose from his spot on the ground, still holding the mask in his hands. He walked over and slipped the mask into his saddlebags. There was much that he didn't know about the whole situation, but he had an idea of who would. Once he was finished with Divine Beast Varudania, it would be time to pay a visit to Kakariko village again. Impa would likely know what was going on. When he finally saddled Spirit again and climbed onto the horse's back, the day had given way to the afternoon. Link looked down at the remains of the campsite and the pile of rocks to one side of it. He took a deep breath and then nudged Spirit into motion, looking ahead to the road before him. It would still take a couple of hours to reach the trading outpost, and Link wanted to be there before night fell. End of chapter.